The twin suns of Prime hung low on the horizon, casting long purple shadows across the courtyard of the Terran embassy. Cole stood at the window of his office and watched the young students gather below. They moved with the careful grace of their kind, their silver skin catching the fatting light like polished metal. He had been ambassador here for 3 years now, and still the beauty of this world took his breath away. Appeared at his door. She was younger than him by 15 years, but she had a gift for connecting with the youth that he admired deeply. Today, she wore the traditional greeting colors of soft blue and white, a sign of respect for their visitors. "The exchange group is ready," she said. 12 students, all between 40 and 60 years old. Nodded. By standards, these were teenagers. Their species lived for 400 years, so a 40-year-old was roughly equal to a 16-year-old human. It was strange to look at beings who appeared fully grown and remember that they were just children learning about the universe. "Any troublemakers?" he asked with a small smile. Hesitated. "There is one, a student named. The teachers warned me that they have been difficult. Apparently does not think much of humans." "Then we will have to change their mind." They walked down together to the courtyard where the group waited. The students stood in a neat line, their large dark eyes watching the humans with curiosity. Most of them had never spoken to a human before today. Introduced himself and welcomed them to the embassy. He explained that they would spend the next 3 days learning about human culture, history, and daily life. The students listened politely, all except one. Stood at the end of the line with arms crossed over their chest. Where the other students wore expressions of interest, wore one of bored contempt. Their silver skin had a slightly darker shade than the others, and their eyes held a sharpness that spoke of intelligence paired with impatience. The first activity was a demonstration of human physical training. Led the students to the embassy gym where several human staff members showed basic exercises. Push-ups, running, weight training. They watched with fascination as humans pushed their bodies to sweat and exhaustion. "Why do you do this to yourselves?" one student asked. "Because our bodies grow weak if we do not challenge them," explained. "Humans must work hard to stay strong." Let out a sound that was clearly a laugh of mockery. "How primitive! The body maintains itself naturally. We do not need to torture ourselves like animals." The room went quiet. The other students looked embarrassed by their classmates' rudeness, kept her composure and smiled gently. "Every species has different needs," she said. "We do not think of it as torture. Many humans enjoy exercise. It makes us feel alive." "Perhaps because you have so little time to feel anything," replied. "What is your 80 years? 90 if you are lucky. That is not even a quarter of a childhood. What could your kind possibly teach us that matters?" Stepped forward. He had dealt with difficult people before, and he recognized the pain hiding behind harsh words. This was not simply rudeness. This was a young person trying to prove something. "You are right that we do not live as long as your people," said calmly. "But length of life is not the same as depth of life. I have known humans who lived short years but left marks on the universe that will last forever. I have also known beings who lived centuries but never truly grew." His eyes narrowed. "And what would you know about growing? You are already old by your standards. More than half your life is gone." "Yes," agreed. "And that has taught me things that take your people much longer to learn. When time is limited, you learn quickly what truly matters. I do not need lessons from a creature who will be dead before I finish my education." Some of the other students gasped at this cruelty, but did not flinch. He had heard worse in his diplomatic career. He looked at with eyes that held no anger, only a patient understanding that seemed to unsettle the young. "Perhaps not," said, "but one day you may remember this conversation and understand it differently." His face flushed with a darker shade of silver. They clearly expected to argue, to fight back, to give them something to push against. His calm acceptance was worse than any punishment. "I do not have to stay here and be lectured," declared. "I am 47 years old. Among my people I am practically an adult. I do not need permission from humans to leave." Started to speak, but raised a hand to stop her. "You are free to go," he said simply. "We do not force anyone to learn." This was clearly not the response wanted. They had been ready for a confrontation, for drama, for proof that humans were the controlling oppressors they believed them to be. Instead, they found only open doors and quiet dignity. "Fine," said, their voice losing some of its certainty. "I will leave, and I will never return to this place." They turned and walked toward the exit. The other students watched in uncomfortable silence. At the door, paused and looked back one more time, as if waiting for someone to stop them. No one did. The door closed behind them, and the sound echoed through the gym like a final word in an argument. Sighed and turned to, should I go after them? Shook his head slowly. He was still watching the door where it had disappeared. There was something in his expression that could not quite read. It was not disappointment or frustration. It looked almost like recognition. No, he said quietly, some lessons cannot be taught, they can only be lived, will find their own way to understanding. And if they do not, smiled though there was sadness in it, then they will live a very long life without ever truly growing up. But I do not think that will happen. There is a fire in that one. Fire can destroy, but it can also light the way. We will see which path chooses. He turned back to the remaining students and continued the demonstration as if nothing had happened. But throughout the rest of the day, his thoughts kept returning to the defiant young who had walked out of his embassy. Somewhere in the twilight city beyond the embassy walls, wandered alone with their anger. They told themselves they were right to leave. They told themselves they did not need anything humans could offer. They told themselves the ambassador's words meant nothing. But deep in a corner of their mind they could not quite silence. Those words had already taken root, and like all seeds, they would simply need time to grow. 15 years had passed since stormed out of the Terran embassy. In human terms, that was nearly a generation. In terms, it was barely a moment. But time moves strangely when it carries weight, and these years had been heavy indeed. Stood in the same office where Cole once watched the sunset. She was the ambassador now, her dark hair showing traces of gray at the temples. The room had not changed much, but she had. The young cultural liaison who once deferred to wisdom had become a leader in her own right. She had earned the respect of the through patience and genuine care for their people. Today that respect was being tested. The holographic display before her showed images of destruction. A human mining company called Frontier Minerals had been excavating in the northern mountains when their equipment broke through into an underground chamber. What they found beneath the rock was a sacred burial site, untouched for over 2,000 years. The mining lasers had damaged several of the ancient tombs before anyone realized what they had discovered. The people were furious. Protests filled the streets of every major city. Traditional leaders demanded that all humans leave the planet immediately. Some called for even harsher punishments. Had spent the last week in emergency negotiations, but every session ended the same way. The council members sat with closed faces and cold voices. They were polite, but their politeness was a wall she could not climb. Ambassador, her assistant called from the doorway. The council session resumes in 1 hour. Also, the delegation from the Office of Cultural Heritage has arrived. They sent a junior aide to observe the negotiations. Who did they send? The assistant checked his tablet. Someone named. Looked up sharply. That name had lived in her memory for 15 years. She remembered a young with fire in their eyes and pain in their voice. She remembered watching them leave with that strange expression of patient hope. Send them in, she said. The door opened and entered. They had changed, though showed age differently than humans. The sharpness in their eyes was still there, but it had softened somehow. Their posture was more controlled. They wore the formal robes of a government official rather than student clothing. Stopped when they saw. For a long moment neither spoke. Ambassador said finally. Their voice was careful, neutral. I was not aware you were still stationed here. I took over from Ambassador Cole 10 years ago, replied. He retired and returned to Earth. Something flickered across his face. It might have been curiosity or something deeper. I see. How is he? Felt the familiar weight of grief that had never fully lifted. He passed away 5 years ago. Natural causes. He was 73. The silence that followed was different from the uncomfortable quiet of their first meeting. Looked genuinely affected by this news. They opened their mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. I am sorry, they said at last. I did not know. Thank you, he lived a good life. He would have been pleased to see you in this role. Looked away. I doubt that. I was not kind to him. No, agreed simply. But he was not the kind of man who held grudges. He believed people could change. The negotiation session that afternoon was brutal. Counselor led the delegation, an ancient being whose hatred for humans was well known. He spoke at length about human carelessness, human greed, and human disregard for anything that did not serve their short-term interests. Your species thinks only of tomorrow, declared. You cannot plan beyond your own brief lives. How can we trust beings who will be dead before the consequences of their actions become clear? This desecration proves what we have always known. Humans are children playing with fire in a house they do not own. Listened without interrupting. When finished, she rose to speak. Counselor is correct that humans have shorter lives than, she said. Her voice was steady and calm. We do not deny this, but I would ask the council to consider what this means for us. We know that every day is precious because we have so few of them. We know that our choices matter because we will not live long enough to escape their consequences. The humans of Frontier Minerals made a terrible mistake. They acted without proper caution. But they also stopped the moment they understood what they had found. They reported their discovery immediately. They have cooperated fully with the investigation. Because they were caught, interrupted. Because it was right, replied. I am not asking you to forgive what happened. I am asking you to see that most humans, like most, want to do what is right. We make mistakes because we are imperfect, not because we are evil. And we try to fix our mistakes because our short lives have taught us that there is no time to waste on pride. The council chamber remained silent. From the observer seats, watched with an expression that had changed throughout her speech. The dismissiveness that once marked their view of humans was gone. In its place was something that looked almost like recognition. The session ended without resolution, but something had shifted, approached as the chambers emptied. Ambassador, they said quietly, may I speak with you privately? They met that evening in his office as the twin suns set, stood by the same window where once watched the young students arrive. The purple shadows stretched across the courtyard just as they had 15 years ago. I have been thinking about what you said today, began slowly. About short lives teaching valuable lessons. Ambassador Cole said something similar to me once. I did not understand it then. Do you understand it now? Turn to face her. I am beginning to. These 15 years have been long enough for me to see how foolish I was as a youth, and yet by human standards they were enough time for a man to grow old and die. They paused. I did not know that he was gone. I always thought there would be time to apologize. Felt tears threatening but held them back. That is the one thing understood better than anyone. There is never as much time as we think. I want to help, said suddenly. I have information about this crisis that the council does not want you to know. The burial site incident was not entirely an accident. There are those among my people who arranged for it to happen. They want humans gone from our world, and they will do anything to achieve that goal. Stared at them. You would betray your own people. No, said firmly. I would save them from making a terrible mistake. That is what Ambassador Cole would have called being a true adult, I think. Doing what is right even when it costs you everything. Outside the window, the stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere among them, the light that had left Earth during Cole's lifetime was still traveling outward into the universe. And in a small office on a distant world, the seeds he had planted were finally beginning to grow. The weeks that followed were filled with secret meetings and whispered conversations, and met in hidden places throughout the city, always careful to avoid the eyes of those who might report their friendship to Counselor. The stakes were too high for carelessness. Daniel Worth joined their efforts on the third week. He was a human historian in his early 30s, attached to the embassy to study culture. When told him what had revealed, his eyes went wide with shock and then narrowed with determination. I knew something was wrong with the official story, Daniel said. They were meeting in a small tea house in the old quarter of the city, where the owners had no love for faction. The mining permits for that region were approved far too quickly. Someone wanted Frontier Minerals digging in exactly that spot. Nodded grimly. The faction has been planning this for decades. They believe that humans are too dangerous to keep as allies. Your short lives make you unpredictable, they say. Your rapid technological growth makes you a threat. They want to end the partnership before humanity becomes too powerful to control. By framing us for desecrating sacred ground, said. Yes, they knew the burial site was there. They made sure the mining company would find it in the worst possible way. The damage was meant to look like human carelessness. The outrage was meant to be unstoppable. Daniel pulled out his tablet and began searching through historical records. If we can prove this, we can turn the whole situation around. But we need evidence that the council cannot ignore. That is the problem, admitted. The faction has hidden their tracks well. Most of the evidence was destroyed years ago. What remains is scattered across classified archives that even I cannot access. They spent long nights searching for anything that could help. Daniel found old communication logs that showed unusual activity around the mining permits, provided names of faction members who had positioned themselves in key government roles, reached out to moderate who might be willing to speak against if given protection. During these weeks, and often talked about Cole, the young seemed hungry for stories about the man who had challenged them so quietly all those years ago. "Tell me about him," asked one evening. They were sitting in his office after another long day of fruitless searching. What was he like when he was not being diplomatic? Smiled at the memories. He loved terrible jokes. The worse the punchline, the harder he would laugh. He collected old books made of actual paper, which he said felt more real than digital text. He missed rain constantly because Prime almost never has it. He would stand outside during the rare storms and let the water soak him while he smiled like a child. That does not match the serious man I remember. He was serious when it mattered, but he believed that life was too short to be serious all the time. He used to say that laughter was humanity's secret weapon. Other species found it confusing that humans could joke even in dark times, said it was how we stayed sane. Was quiet for a long moment. I wish I had known him better. I wish I had not been so determined to see only what I wanted to see. You were young. I was 47 years old. And that is young for your people. Understood that. He never blamed you for how you acted that day. He blamed the circumstances that made you feel you had something to prove. What circumstances? Considered how much to share. He told me once that he recognized something in you. He said you reminded him of himself when he was young, full of fire and desperate to be taken seriously. He was not a peaceful man in his youth. He had to learn patience the hard way, through mistakes and regrets. That is why he was so gentle with you. He knew that fighting your anger would only make it grow. Absorbed this in silence. Outside the window, the lights of the city sparkled in the purple darkness. Somewhere out there, his faction was working to destroy everything humans and had built together. And somewhere inside's heart, walls that had stood for decades were finally beginning to crack. Daniel burst through the door the next morning, with excitement burning in his eyes. "I found it," he said breathlessly. "In the historical archives, buried under centuries of routine reports. There are records of the High Council from 200 years ago discussing the burial site location. It was surveyed and mapped in detail. The information was classified to protect the site, but copies were made and distributed to certain government offices, including the Office of Cultural Heritage, realized, my own department." "Exactly. Someone in your office knew precisely where that burial site was. They gave that information to whoever arranged the mining permits. If we can trace the chain of communication, we can prove the whole thing was planned." Felt hope rising for the first time in weeks. "Can we access those records?" "I can try," said slowly. "But if I am caught looking for classified documents, my career is over. Worse than that. We'll know we are investigating. He will move against us before we can present our evidence." "Then we need to be fast," Daniel said. "Get in, get the proof, and take it straight to the High Council before anyone can stop us." Stood and walked to the window. The twin suns were rising, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. In human terms, this was a new day full of possibility. In terms, it was a moment that might define the next century of relations between their species. "Ambassador Cole told me something once," said without turning around. "He said that adulthood is not about age. It is about understanding consequences and accepting them anyway. I did not know what he meant then." "And now?" asked. Turned to face them. There was fear in their eyes, but there was also something stronger. It was the same fire that had burned so destructively in their youth, now channeled into something purposeful. "Now I understand. I will get your evidence, whatever it costs me." Rose and placed a hand on shoulder. It was a human gesture of comfort that rarely used, but did not pull away. "You are not alone in this," said. "Whatever happens, we face it together. That is something else believed strongly. No one should have to carry heavy burdens alone." Looked at her hand, then at her face. For a moment, the 62-year-old looked very young again, but in a different way than before. Not angry or defensive, simply uncertain and reaching for support. "Together," agreed. "I am beginning to see why humans accomplish so much in so little time. You do not waste your years on pride. Some of us do, admitted, but the best of us learn not to, and sometimes we have good teachers from other worlds who remind us what matters. Almost smiled. I think Ambassador Cole would have appreciated that, being called a teacher by a human who now teaches me. He would have loved it, said, and he would have made a terrible joke about it that we would all pretend was funny. For the first time since they had reunited, laughed. It was a small sound, uncertain and rusty from disuse, but it was real, and somewhere in the universe, if such things were possible, Cole was probably laughing too. The High Council chamber was carved from crystallized starlight, or so the legends claimed. In truth, it was made of a rare mineral found only in the deepest caves of Prime, a stone that glowed faintly with an inner light that never faded. The chamber was older than human civilization itself. Decisions made within these walls had shaped the course of galactic history for thousands of years. Today, walked into this ancient place carrying evidence that could change everything. The night before had been the longest of their life, had broken into the classified archives of the Office of Cultural Heritage, moving through digital security systems and physical barriers with skills they did not know they possessed. Fear made them clever. Desperation made them bold. By morning, they had everything Daniel needed onto a secure device. But getting the evidence was only the first challenge. Getting it before the council would be much harder. Had requested permission to address the council as a witness in the ongoing investigation. This was allowed under law, though rarely used by junior officials. Counselor had argued against it, but High Elder overruled him. The Elder was over 300 years old, wise and careful. She had watched faction grow in power for decades, and suspected she had concerns she could not voice openly. The chamber was full when arrived. Representatives from every major government body filled the curved stone seats that rose in tiers around the central floor. Human observers sat in a separate section, including and Daniel. The weight of hundreds of watching eyes pressed down on like a physical force. But before they could reach the speaking platform, a familiar voice called out. A moment. Ambassador stood in the corridor outside the main entrance. His parent wore formal robes of deep purple, marking their high rank in the diplomatic corps. Their face was unreadable, but their eyes held something that might have been fear. You cannot do this, said quietly. I know what you are planning. If you speak against, you destroy everything. Your career, our family's reputation, everything I have worked for. Felt their stomach twist. They had always sought their parents' approval, always hoped that someday would see them as worthy. This moment should have made them proud. Instead, was asking them to stay silent. You knew, said, it was not a question. You knew about the faction. You knew what they were doing. Did not deny it. I knew some things, not everything, enough to understand that speaking against them would achieve nothing except my own destruction. So you chose safety over truth. I chose survival for myself, for our family. There is no shame in that. The faction is too powerful to fight. Even if you present your evidence today, they will find ways to dismiss it. They will destroy you and nothing will change. Looked at their parent for a long moment. All their life, they had seen as a figure of strength and wisdom. Now they saw something else. They saw fear that had grown so familiar it felt like common sense. They saw compromise that had become so routine it felt like wisdom. Ambassador Cole told me once that adulthood means understanding consequences and accepting them anyway, said softly. I did not understand him then. I thought he was lecturing me because he enjoyed it, but he was trying to give me something, a choice, the same choice you made when you decided to stay silent. And what choice are you making? The one you could not. Turned and walked into the council chamber without looking back. The session had already begun. Counselor was speaking, his ancient voice filling the crystallized hall with carefully crafted arguments against humanity. He spoke of human recklessness, human greed, and human disregard for anything beyond their brief lives. The same words had once believed without question. When finished, High Elder called for witnesses, rose to defend humanity, but before she could speak, stepped forward. High Elder, I request permission to testify. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Eyes narrowed with sudden suspicion, studied for a long moment, then nodded. The council recognizes of the Office of Cultural Heritage. You may speak. Walked to the central platform. Their legs felt weak and their heart beat too fast, but they thought of Cole, who had faced them with such patience 15 years ago. They thought of who had welcomed their help despite every reason to distrust them. They thought of Daniel, working through sleepless nights to find the truth. They thought of what it meant to truly grow up. 15 years ago, I met a human named Cole, began. Their voice echoed in the vast chamber. I was young and angry, and I believed that humans had nothing to teach us. I told him that I was practically an adult. He did not argue. He simply let me leave and trusted that I would eventually understand. The chamber was completely silent now. Even had stopped his quiet conversations with nearby counselors. It took me 15 years to understand what he meant, and in that time he grew old and died. 73 years. That was all he had, less than a fifth of my life so far. And yet in that brief time, he accomplished more and taught more and touched more lives than many who live for centuries. Pulled out the data device and held it up for all to see. I have evidence that the burial site incident was not an accident. It was planned by members of this very council who wanted to destroy the human alliance. They knew exactly where the sacred tombs were located. They arranged for the mining permits to target that specific area. They used our ancestors' graves as a weapon against beings they feared. The chamber erupted. Counselors shouted over each other, Rose with fury burning in his ancient eyes. "This is outrageous," roared. "This child makes accusations without proof, without authority, without any right to speak in these halls." "I have proof," replied, their voice cutting through the chaos. "Communications between faction members, financial records showing payments to officials who approved the permits, classified documents from my own department that reveal full knowledge of the burial site location." They turned to face directly. "High Elder, I submit this evidence for the Council's review. I ask only that it be examined fairly." Raised one hand, and the chamber fell silent. Her ancient eyes moved from to the data device being passed to the verification team. "This council will recess while the evidence is examined," she declared. "All parties will remain available for questioning. And Counselor, you will explain why documents from your personal archives appear in this testimony." His face went pale. For the first time in decades, the most powerful member of the anti-human faction had no response. As the chamber emptied, stood alone on the central platform. Their career was likely over. Their family would never forgive them. Everything they had built in 62 years was burning around them. But when they looked up at the observer section, they saw watching them. She placed one hand over her heart in a human gesture of gratitude and respect. And somehow that was enough. In the corridor outside, Ambassador waited. But when emerged, they walked past their parent without stopping. There would be time for that conversation later, or perhaps there would not. Either way, had finally learned what Cole tried to teach them so long ago. Being an adult was not about how long you had lived. It was about standing for what was right, even when you stood alone. 6 months had passed since stood before the High Council and changed the course of history. The investigation that followed confirmed everything the evidence suggested. Counselor and 17 members of his faction were removed from their positions. Some faced trial for their crimes. Others simply disappeared into quiet retirement, their power broken beyond repair. The memorial garden was built on a hill overlooking the capital city. It was a place where humans could come together to honor those who had worked for peace between their peoples. At the center of the garden stood a statue of Cole, carved from the same glowing stone as the council chamber. The artist had captured something essential in his face, a look of patient kindness that seemed to watch over all who visited. Walked through the garden on the morning of the dedication ceremony. She had announced her retirement the previous week. 49 years old, she had decided it was time to return to Earth and see the blue skies and rain that had missed so dearly. The embassy would be in good hands. A new generation of diplomats was ready to continue the work she had begun. Met her at the entrance, wearing the formal robes of their new position. The High Elder herself had appointed as the official liaison between and human governments. It was a role that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. Now it felt inevitable. "You look well," said. "The new job suits you." "It is strange," admitted. "I spent so many years trying to climb the ladder of government. Now that I have lost everything I thought I wanted, I have been given something better, something meaningful. That is how life works sometimes. The things we chase are not always the things we need." They walked together through the garden paths, past flowers from a dozen worlds planted in careful harmony. Visitors from both species moved quietly among the greenery, some reading the memorial plaques, others simply enjoying the peace of the place. "There is someone I want you to meet," said. "She arrived from Earth this morning." A woman stood at the base of statue. She was human, perhaps 40 years old, with dark hair streaked with gray and eyes that held a familiar warmth. When she turned and saw approaching, her face broke into a smile that carried both joy and grief. The woman said, embracing her, "It is so good to finally see you in person. Laura, this is the one your father talked about." Laura Cole turned to face the who had once insulted her father and stormed out of his embassy. She did not look angry or resentful. Her eyes held only curiosity and something that might have been gratitude. "My father mentioned you in his letters," Laura said. "Not by name, but I always knew who he was talking about, the young who reminded him of himself." Felt the old shame rising, the memory of harsh words spoken to a dying man who deserved better. "I am sorry for how I treated him. I was young and foolish, and I said things that cannot be unsaid." He did not hold it against you. He wrote that you had fire in you, and that fire could be dangerous or beautiful depending on how it was used. He hoped he would live long enough to see which you chose. Laura's voice wavered slightly. "He did not live that long, but I think he would be proud of the choice you made." The dedication ceremony began an hour later. Representatives from both governments gathered in the garden as High Elder took the speaking platform. She was older than anyone present, old enough to remember a time before humans came to the stars. But her words spoke of future rather than past. "We are here to honor a man who understood something that takes most beings centuries to learn," said. Cole knew that understanding between different people does not happen through grand gestures or political agreements. It happens through small moments of patience and kindness. It happens when we choose to see the best in those who are different from us, even when they show us their worst. She gestured toward, who stood near the statue within Laura. "Ambassador Cole planted seeds in many hearts during his short time among us. Some of those seeds took years to grow, but they are growing now, and they will continue to grow long after all of us are gone. That is the true measure of a life well lived. Not how many years you have, but how many lives you touch." After the ceremony, stood alone before the statue as the crowd slowly departed. The carved face of Cole looked down at them with that patient expression they remembered so well. "I was practically an adult," said quietly. "That is what I told you. I was 47 years old and I thought I knew everything. I thought your short life made you less than me. I thought your calm patience was weakness." The statue did not respond, of course, but felt something anyway, a sense of connection across time and death, that explanation. "I am 62 now. By your standards, I would be an old man preparing for death. By my standards, I am still young with centuries ahead of me. But I finally understand what you tried to teach me. Age does not make wisdom. Wisdom comes from choosing to grow, from admitting when we are wrong, from standing for truth even when it costs everything." Appeared beside them, with Laura following close behind. "We are going to the embassy for dinner," said. "Will you join us?" Looked at the two human women. One had been their reluctant ally, now their trusted friend. The other was the daughter of the man who had changed their life with a single quiet conversation. "Yes," said, "I would like that." As they walked away from the memorial garden, paused at the gate and looked back one more time. The statue of Cole stood in the fading light of the twin suns, watching over the garden where two species learned to understand each other. Tomorrow would begin teaching a new group of young about human culture. Some of them would be dismissive and arrogant, just as had once been. Some of them would need time to learn what could not be taught, but would be patient with them, as had been patient. They would plant seeds and trust that those seeds would grow. Because that was what it meant to be truly adult, not counting years or demanding respect, but giving to others what someone once gave to you and trusting that the gift would be passed on. The stars were beginning to appear in the purple sky. Somewhere among them, light that had left Earth during Cole's lifetime was still traveling outward into forever. And in a memorial garden on a distant world, his legacy was growing stronger with each passing day. Smiled and followed their friends down the hill toward the city lights below. They had hundreds of years ahead of them. Hundreds of years to honor the memory of a man who had only 73. Hundreds of years to prove that sometimes the shortest lives leave the longest shadows. And that was exactly what they intended to do.